thing. It should have been sent on to the
But on the 12th page, the link page, yes.
Oh, it does not.
Yeah.
Good. And why did it still went through the lens out? I always copied it out. Great.
Okay, maybe we can start. Let's get started. Welcome to the Cbor Working Group meeting. If you're not, this is not your destination, please leave. Please know the note well. You've seen this several times now. But if you haven't, take a moment to read it through. Just a reminder that minutes are taken. This meeting is recorded and presence is logged. There are blue sheets. We would need volunteers for the minutes. Can someone volunteer to take minutes? Minute taker. Thank you, Christian. And can someone check the Cbor? Okay, thank you. Okay, I can take a look at the Cbor if there is anything. This is the agenda for today. So we are at the introduction. The chairs will give a short status update of CDDL, and then Carsten will present the rest of the documents. Cbor BIS and array tag, and then we will have a discussion about the next steps for this working group. Anything anyone wants to add to this agenda, or? Looks fine. So, Cbor Working Group status update. First of all, we have a new co-chair. Thank you, Jim, for taking the role. And thank you, Barry, for the service. We've had 6 interims since IETF 103. They were, I think, very useful. You can see all the minutes and slides when there were in the Cbor meetings in the data tracker. So take a look at that. About the 7049 BIS, we are now at version 5. It was submitted in January 2019, but a lot has happened in the GitHub since. So you can see the diff there. And I hope we can address the leftover issues today in Carsten's presentation. About the Cbor array tag, the working group last call ended a couple of days ago, or 1 week ago. There were some reviews posted. Also, we will discuss the raised points if there is any controversy, and then Carsten should meet an update. CDDL, congratulations. So it's now in the RFC editor queue. So good to know it's in cluster 325. So this is unblocking the number of documents in Anima. So that's great. So just for your information, there were 2 versions published. So version 7 that was published to answer discuss, and then version 8 was published to answer some comments that were leftovers. So that's it. I haven't counted how many versions that is actually. I think it's 19. But yeah, congratulations. So Carsten, you can come and take over now.
Yeah, so when you usually when work is done, that is exactly the time when you start thinking about what's up next. So let's talk about CDDL once more. So I made another one of those slides. We already had some discussion both at IETF 102 and IETF 103 about what the next steps in the evolution of that specification might be. I don't think we want to repeat that discussion today. But if you do have an idea that is not on the slides of 102 or 103, please send a message to the mailing list. If you are sitting there writing a CDDL specification and are bothered by something, please make that known, because we do want to evolve the specification to make it easier to use. Make it even easier to use, is the right phrase. Now, there are a few questions that came up at this meeting. And the first one was, how do you actually pronounce CDDL? And about half of the people say CDDL, and the other half say cuddle. And I think we as a working group should have an opinion on what we actually want to say. I mean, some of you will know about the small computer systems interface that nobody knows as SCSI, but everybody knows as SCSI. So there are some abbreviations that really are in the minds of people in a pronounceable way. And we have to find out whether we want a pronounceable abbreviation and whether cuddle actually is the one we want. If you know about the history of SCSI, that actually entered the committee being pronounced sexy. But in the prudish USA of the 80s, that wasn't possible, so it became SCSI after a short while. And yeah, I'm not sure about the cultural sensitivities here, so I don't know whether cuddle is actually acceptable in all the jurisdictions we are trying to reach here. So does anybody except me have an opinion on this? What are you saying? Who's saying cuddle? Who's saying CDDL? Okay. Yes. No, of course you don't have to have a single pronunciation. So for instance, an AS1 object ID is often called AS1 object ID and is often called OID. Yeah, I don't know. So maybe we can leave that open, but maybe you can also keep this in mind and build an opinion. And if that has ripened, please send it to the mailing list. One other observation that came up in one working group that was working with CDDL was, where are the CDDL doctors? So we have SNMP doctors, we have Yang doctors, cuddle doctors. Well, Henk proposed calling them cuddle fairies, because that's maybe better. But generally, the objective, of course, is to have CDDL be sufficiently accessible that you don't need a mediator, a priest that establishes your line to God. But you actually can do it yourself. So maybe we're actually making a point out of the fact that there are no CDDL doctors. But on the other hand, maybe some tutoring and coaching is useful. And there is this website, cddl.space, sitting there that is now ripe to be filled. And I think maybe I would like to have pointers to a few people who actually are willing to be tutors and coaches in this space. Jeffrey.
This is Jeffrey Yeskin. I think that it will be useful to have this kind of advice available. Your point that it's intended to be kind of self-explanatory. I mean, it's pretty close, but I think some of the matching algorithm is less obvious than would be needed in order to be completely self-explanatory. So it'll be useful to have these people.
Yeah, even things that are self-explanatory don't always arrive at the recipient. I mean, sometimes. So yesterday we had this brief discussion. How do I write down multimap in CDDL? So there is a idiom for that, and maybe just putting that somewhere and pointing people, this is the way we write down multimaps. That's something useful. If you are interested to be on this page, either with your own advice or just with your name, please contact me after the meeting. Okay, I think that's all I have on CDL. Now the Cbor BIS part. I think the major advance we have made in the last couple of months is that we now have a pretty well understood separation between 3 levels of errors, 2 of which are at the Cbor level and 1 is at the application level. Don't think we have a very good term for the application level yet. I have used the term expected because that turned up in some discussion, but maybe we need a better term for that. But the idea is that there are syntax errors which make something not well formed, and generally in the Cbor space that means you are not continuing. And Appendix C contains the 20 lines of code to do this well-formedness check. And then second, we have validity, which is on the semantic level. Validity errors do not stop the possibility of presenting something to the application, but it might come to the application in a much less chewable form than valid stuff. So if you have a tag 2 with a text string in it, that's not something the decoder can just process into a big num. It's definitely a validity error. Now, whether the application wants to do something with that or not depends maybe on a discussion that we still have to have. And the third level is things that are just fine from the Cbor point of view, but maybe a problem for the application because the application is actually expecting data in a certain shape or with certain semantics. And that's where CDDL might come in, or Yang, or some other modeling language, or it's just defined in text. So these errors exist, and the reason why it's a good idea to talk about them in the spec is that it's rarely useful to just think about well-formedness and validity at the Cbor level. There is in particular with validity, there is a gray area that really only can be disambiguated by the application. And the first example of that tripped us up for the last 5 years was the integer versus floating point thing, where originally the intention was to integrate these 2 spaces as much as they are in JSON. And it turned out that implementers didn't really want to do this at all. So we are now moving to keeping them separate at the generic Cbor level, but your application might still do that. In particular, if it's a JavaScript-based application, then it's much easier for the application to throw all numbers into one bin. So that again opens some validity questions. So imagine that you have a tag that only takes floating point numbers. You cannot even write that down in JavaScript because some numbers are integer by nature. I mean, even if you write them down as floating point, they will be converted into something that actually is integer. So I think we made some progress here. And I definitely did not understand these 3 levels when we wrote down RFC 7049. So I think that's significant progress we have made in this working group. So number 17, which is Jeffrey's pull request that does most of the work of getting this distinction in, is mostly integrated. So I don't know, Jeffrey, do you want to rebase this once more? It's maybe asking a little bit much, but so I took most of your changes, but some of these changes I polished slightly, which is why there are so many merge conflicts now. And the items that I didn't integrate yet: delete redundant text. and it's just very tedious to check that all that redundant text is already covered in different places. So this is just a to-do, an editorial to-do that needs to be done. But I don't think we have a technical issue with number 17 at the moment. We do have a slightly wobbly definition of strict. So the definition of strict was done before we did the work of defining the preferred encoding, and actually the preferred encoding still requires some editorial changes as well. Yeah, as usual, there is an application content to this. You cannot entirely do strict decoding on the generic Cbor level. And again, the same thing happens when you have a decoder that is checking deterministic encoding. So a generic Cbor decoder can check deterministic encoding at the Cbor level, but not at the application level. So there always will be an application component to a deterministic checking decoder. Does anyone have a slightly less mouthful word for a deterministic checking decoder?
This is Jeffrey Yaskin. I think Lawrence Lundblade suggested in his email that we might just remove strict decoder. And I like that idea. I haven't double checked that it works, but the use that I can see for strict decoder is in an application or in a protocol definition or an application spec. You would say like the decoder must be a strict decoder. And I don't think there's anything, I don't think that means enough beyond like the decoder must reject invalid input. Like I think we should just say the decoder must reject invalid input, and that covers everything that strict decoder might cover, and so it's unnecessary.
Okay. Now I don't have the text in front of me, but I seem to remember that it actually was about preferred encoding as well.
Jeffrey Askin again. There is also, I don't think that strict decoder currently requires the preferred encoding, but it might. But we can also say that in an application spec, like the encoding must be the preferred encoding. So we would say it must reject invalid input and must reject non-preferred or non-deterministic encodings. Okay. And that is clearer than saying strict mode, unless we could define strict mode as that, but that would be a very short section. And in that case, it would be fine.
Yeah, so maybe we should have this single paragraph somewhere that says encoders may want to be preferred checking and encoders may want to be deterministic checking, and get rid of the strict thing otherwise.
So Lawrence Lundblade. So I was just looking at strict mode, and it does talk about deterministic, but it's not sharp about it. It also says a lot about rejecting invalid Cbor. So I went through all of the Cbor defined in BIS to see what could be interpreted as invalid or not. I found about 18 instances of things that, from simple things like, okay, this is a date, an epoch-based date, but you gave me a B string, right? That's easy. You've also got an example of a UTF-8 string, which is very hard to check for. And then if you really extend the model, I mean, you should have a MIME parser, and you should be, because if you have something that's tagged as MIME,
yes,
yeah, you should invalid, and it's got invalid MIME, it's invalid, right?
Yes.
So the set of what's valid and invalid is very expensive to compute, and could be very highly variable from one implementation to another. So yeah, and it's extensible. So that notion of valid and invalid, it seems really problematic. And strict mode definitely is oriented around valid and invalid. Strict mode also seems to have this thing about firewall functionality and security characteristics, which
we toned that down already. So I think that is fixed.
I'm not happy, but I think it needs to go. So I guess I'm still I'm just kind of advocating maybe strict mode going away.
Yeah.
A mode where you check some things for validity and not other things, where it's really undefined, that seems like not like a mode. That's just a collection of things you could check for or not check for. And it's definitely, we are not going to expect encoder or decoders to check for all of those things. It just, that does not make sense to me, because some of those are so expensive, right? And they make more sense being checked at the next layer up, right? So strict mode as a way to check for valid and invalid, that I think is not a good idea. I'd like to see that go away. Strict mode as something that for deterministic, I'd have to think about that one a little bit more. I'm not sure. That wasn't the way I was thinking about it. So
one thing a strict mode decoder could do, and I think this is the only validity thing that happens outside of tags, is the non-duplication of map keys. Now, that is interesting again, because whether a map key really is duplicate or not may depend on your application. So it's again something that a generic decoder can only do to a certain extent.
Mike.
Yeah.
All right, yeah. UTF-8 checking is also outside of tags.
Right.
And
This is Jeffrey Yaskin. My mental model has two kinds of decoders. There's generic decoders and protocol decoders. And I think it's totally unreasonable to ask a generic decoder to check tag validity for several of the reasons Lawrence mentioned. But a protocol decoder has many fewer, like the protocol has defined the set of tags it uses.
Yes.
And those decoders should be able to check for validity. And I think that's where it makes sense to use must not be invalid as a part of the specification.
That's a great conclusion for the next 5 slides I have. So really the pull request that was most difficult for me to integrate was the tag validity one from Jeffrey. So the clarifications are good, but I think before we do that, we should think about the direction taken by 7049 here. So each tag defines its own validity requirements based on the state of the universe at the time it was defined. And the problem really is that the state of the universe actually changes. And so one example might be tag 1 that everybody knows, that takes an integer or a floating point where we have a few more numbers in Cbor. And for instance, we should have defined tag 1 to take decimal as well, but we didn't. So then we had to invent tag 1001 to do that. And to me, that sounds pretty onerous. Or tag 36 is defined as taking UTF-8. And of course, there are MIME messages that are binary encoded. So we now have 257 for those. And that seems to be a recurring theme, that we don't get the tag validity quite right, and really means something different than what we actually write. So the idea was that tag 36 actually is a valid MIME message, but the idea really wasn't that it only addresses UTF-8 coded ones. So let me just propose 2 models using some terms I borrowed from the political space. So you can define tag validity in a reactionary way, which means you write something down, and then you spend the next 200 years trying to interpret what the founders meant. So a tag is defined, at the time it is defined, with a certain set of substructures that are acceptable. So for instance, tag 1 was defined to only allow integer or floating point numbers as its tag value. And a new substructure in this model can never exceed to an existing tag. So I cannot define a new tag and say, by the way, this tag here defines something that is really useful as a part of tag 1. because it's tag 1 that defines what can be in it, and not the thing that you can put into a tag 1 that defines that. So the good thing about the reactionary approach is it leaves very little ambiguity about tag validity, even at the generic level. But as Jeffrey already has said, tag validity is really more interesting at the application level, and the application might be quite happy to accept a new type substructure in that tag. Let me just quickly explain the other one. The progressive tag validity works by having the tag defined with some abstract semantics. So for instance, tag 1 could have said any real number can be a tag value. And this makes clear a byte string doesn't cut it because it's not a real number. But if I define a new tag that also provides a real number, that can be immediately used in tag 1. So any substructure that fulfills the abstract semantics will do. And now I have the opportunity when I define a new tag to say, this is actually useful as the tag value of those and those existing tags. This doesn't mean that all possible combinations will always be hit, but it makes it more likely that if a tag is defined, new tag is defined, the relationship to existing tags is actually examined, and people write up what combinations work and what don't. So, for instance, a tag, another example, a tag expecting an array of numbers currently would look explicitly for major type 4, and now we could say, well, it's taking an array of numbers, and so it can take a typed array. Jeffrey.
This is Jeffrey Yaskin. I really like progressive tag validity. I think to decide whether it works, we have to think about what it is we use tag, like why do we use tags? In any particular protocol, you could just define the structure of the data and say, like, we interpret the like the array of numbers this byte string as a typed array, and not tag it, and the protocol parser will understand that fine. I think the benefit of tags is for kind of debuggers and things that turn something into a human readable form in a fairly generic way without needing to know the protocol it's embedded in. And so those will get broken by new things that go in tags until they get updated to support the new thing. And so I think as long as we're always defining the structures in specs, those debuggers will be able to keep up. It does mean, I think it affects section 4, the guidelines for writing protocols.
Yes.
Because you can no longer say such and such must be a valid instance of this tag. You have to say what it is allowed to contain for the purpose of this particular protocol.
Right. So you raised one very scary specter there. I don't know if you noticed that. So when I compose my application out of various pieces of software, I want to use a generic decoder, and I want to write my application code. And a situation where I would have to wait for the generic decoder to accept a certain new tag combination so I can write my application, that would be bad. But if we say it's actually the job of the generic decoder to deliver tag combinations it doesn't understand as is to the application, we are not running into this deployability problem. I think that's one thing we have to make very explicit.
Sean Leonard. I also agree with preferring progressive tag validity for similar reasons, and treating, as you said, cases where a generic decoder doesn't understand the particular tag combination with the data as being novel, as not treating as a fatal parsing or decoding error, but allowing some of that to go up to the application so it can make a decision on how to process that. So applications can polyfill, I guess, right? The lack of capability of the generic decoder. So, and also I think that would allow us to keep a smaller set of more universally applicable tags,
Yes.
right? Which I think is actually very important. For me, for the MIME message case, that's important for some of the applications that I use, and I would much rather just use one tag for MIME messages than two tags, or eventually having to recognize huge quantities of tags that do the same thing, right? Just for different types of data.
Brendan Moran, I think that the progressive tag validity is begging for vast quantities of compatibility failures, especially in the area of IoT devices where they will not necessarily be updated to handle new tags. This is, or new interpretations of a tag. This is going, I mean, the tag 1 taking any number in R, if you were to build a firmware update system, for example, that requires a timestamp for validity, and the very data structure that's delivering the update to handling the tags can't understand the tag it's been handled, you're going to wind up with problems. So I think that it's a great idea semantically, it's a great approach to reducing the number of tags, but I don't think that it's going to play out very well in practice. I think there's going to be a lot of compatibility failings.
So right now, when you look at the timestamps in Suite, do you say anything about?
They are completely untagged for this exact reason, yes.
Okay, but you say they are integers, or they are floats.
They are integers, yeah.
Yeah, so you did the right thing. The application protocol made a decision.
Yes, but the point is, if I have to make that decision, then the tags aren't helping.
Yes and no. So again, there are two reasons why when a tag could be helping. One is the reason that Jeffrey said, there are diagnostic debugging tools. Those are actually enabled by having self-describing information like tags in the structures. And the other place where tags actually are extremely useful is if you want to define your protocol in such a way to enable extensibility.
Now,
And you use the tag as an extension point.
I understand the goal. I understand the approach that's being taken here. But I also see that in a world of infrequently updated devices, if these are used in any place that is critical, they will cause a critical failure.
Yeah, but only if the application developer didn't do their job.
This is Jeffrey Yaskin. I think we can expect application developers to not do their job in some cases.
Yes.
The point I wanted to make was that tags, I think, are not for the benefit of protocol designers. They don't help with kind of defining what data your application must accept. I don't fully understand the use case about extensibility points, but I don't know that we need to go into that in this meeting. But the use for diagnostic tools, I did realize one thing that I'm worried about, which is that you're sending tagged data to an application that expects, say you take tag 1 that expects integers, or your protocol expects integers, and your diagnostic tool renders any number as a timestamp, and so you kind of are inspecting data, you see a time, you think it's good, but it's actually the wrong kind of time, and so your application breaks and you can't see why in the diagnostic tool. So I'm not sure if that is kind of if the downsides are enough to convince me progressive tag validity is not a good idea, but like there's definitely trade-offs which we should think about and probably discuss on the mailing list.
Yeah, it's a sharp instrument, so you have to handle it with some care. I agree with that.
Lawrence Lundblade. One thing I saw tagging is useful for was knowing how to translate, or how a generic encoder would translate or represent in the native representation. So if it knows it's a date, a generic decoder can put it in the date representation that's most appropriate for that platform and programming environment. So that seems like a useful thing and a convenient thing, and makes generic decoders easier to use.
Right. So let me just give a number of examples. One example is I have a place in my protocol where I can accept any integer number. Now, if I can represent that in 64 bits, I'm using major type 0 and 1. If I need more than 64 bits, I use tag 2 and 3. So in that case, the tag actually is part of the set of Cbor types that create the space of integers. So that's one example of using tags. I have different types of things. They're all acceptable to my application at this place, and I'm using tags to represent some of them. Then we have places like in Yang Cbor, where we use tags to identify certain pieces of information as a little bit different than it normally would be. So if you do a union of enumerations in Yang Cbor, you sometimes have to tag things within this union of enumerations because Yang is slightly weird and has different ways of interpreting that. So that's an application function that is entirely about tagging things. So a tag is quite appropriate. But it's really the application. It's not something a generic decoder would understand or support. The first example I had, a generic decoder in any programming language that has a large integer space will do that for you. So you will never see it in the application. The second example always has to be handled by the application. And that is also a way to provide extension points in your application by saying this can be a number of things, and then you later come in and say, oh, it can be that thing as well.
Jim Schad, individual. I think that you also need to look at the opposite side of this issue, which is the generic encoder all of a sudden is a real pain to think about, because the application now needs to say, generic encoder, you can use this set of things, but not that set of things. And that's actually potentially more problematic than the decoder off.
We have that problem with floating point numbers already. So yes, that's painful.
Ari Keränen, couple of questions. I suppose the idea is that you could use one or the other mode. It's not you can choose based on your application whether you do progressive or more strict mode. Is that the case?
I have a slide somewhere.
Because I mean, I kind of share what Brendan was saying. Some applications may run into a lot of issues.
Yes. So there are two parts to this. One is what do we actually do about the tags we have? I mean, we can enable progressive validity for new tags, but we have some tags that say only use this with something. So we have to decide whether we actually open up those tags or stick with reactionary validity there. And in the end, you're right, the application makes the call. But as Jim said, now we are making the interface between the generic encoder and the application significantly more complicated, because you now need to be able to tell the generic encoder use this tag, but you don't use the other tag.
Okay. Then another question on the semantic interoperability. I don't know what was the actual word you used in the previous slide. Who gets to choose if this abstract semantics, or how do you define? Let's say I accept number. Now it's a string that has 42. Is that compatible or not, or how would you go about on defining that?
Well, a string is not a number.
So it's only is there existing rules that you have here that what are compatible, what are not?
No. So when you actually define a tag, you would say what can go in there.
And that would be the primitive types.
But not by prescribing specific structural features of what can go in there, but by defining it at the semantic level. And you're asking, are we using QUDT or you come for that?
No, not on that level. I was more thinking like, do I know, or if I define a new tag, how do I describe on the kind of actual level, like maps to something on the wire, what does fulfill the abstract semantics? But yeah, maybe I have to have a closer look on that and see how it works out.
Yeah, so the weird part is that the progressive approach actually creates something like a type system. So the idea is that a new tag definition should document both what it expects from the tag value and what it actually creates, what it exposes to the application or to the next tag around it. And we don't have a formal system for that. I think that's really what you were trying to say. Yeah, I'm not sure we have to invent it right on the spot here. That might be something we want to do at some point. So at some point, something like CDDL will want to learn semantics as well. That may be the place where we actually introduce such a type system.
Jeffrey Askin, the data model section kind of anticipates that tags will define new types. I think I'm comfortable with the idea of doing it in an ad hoc way for a while. Obviously, we're going to get it wrong as we learn how to do it, but it shouldn't be worse than what we have now.
Thank you. Okay, so if we go all the way on the progressive scale, we would allow the application to define its expectedness within tags. So we would allow the application to say, oh, 36 really only was defined for UTF-8, but I kind of know what my message in binary encoding is. So this is a little bit the extreme case of this. But it would allow us to kind of reclaim 36 and say, okay, that was a mistake, only allowing text encoded my messages. We are adding in binary later. This creates a little bit of instability. I think I have heard that we don't really want to do this, which doesn't mean that we don't want to apply 18, but we may want to put 18 into a context that it's clear that's kind of the default validity until the application says something different. And what we probably want to do, we want to explore this progressive tag validity a little bit. And yeah, this is an internet standard. So saying we are going to do this in a hard fashion for a while is kind of weird. But I think that's what essentially applications already have been doing in one form or another. So I'm not sure that we are actually changing a lot. We are making things explicit that people already have been doing. So I would be comfortable with doing this, but of course the ISG might not be.
Jeffrey Askin, I think progressive tag validity is pretty experimental, and I think I'm uncomfortable putting it in a document we want to call an internet standard.
Mm-hmm.
I would be totally fine pulling the tag definitions out to another RFC that stays in the proposed standard category and publishing it at the same time.
Okay, that's certainly one way of handling this. Of course, that goes against the batteries included idea. So there are a few tags that kind of are really needed, like tag 2 and 3, and.
This is Jeffrey Askin again. Yes, so tags 2 and 3, perhaps we can say those use the reactionary type and are defined in exactly the way they were in the original standard and are now locked down. But like tag 1, definitely needs to move to the other document. So yeah, I get your point, but we maybe should do it anyway.
Okay, that sounds like a way forward.
Sean Leonard. So I just have a question about the big num types. Why exactly? Can somebody maybe just elucidate what the controversy is about why they're reactionary or why anybody wants to extend them? Because I thought that the byte strings have infinite length.
I don't think there is controversy there.
Okay, but that also means that there's nobody sees a need to extend them or change them in the future.
So
right?
far, that hasn't surfaced. I mean, I cannot predict the future, but I would find that surprising.
Right. Okay. Just wanted to check, because my read of 7049 was that it wasn't very apparent that the reactionary approach was the approach taken. I thought it was more, I wouldn't exactly say ambiguous, but it just wasn't. It wasn't contemplated, I guess.
So if you look at the tags we defined, some of them are really locked down, like 2 and 3, and some of which are really so experimental that we got them wrong by doing them like 36. So it's my message. So I think it's a good idea to like we did with COSI, where we have split the document up between things that are going standard and things that are recycling at proposed, if I understand it correctly.
No, actually, we're in information library.
Yeah, we don't have that liberty. We are not security. The security area is the only area that can do normative things in informational documents.
Alexi, that's not entirely true.
No. So other areas may be able to do informative, normative things in informational documents as well. Yeah, so I think that's not the outcome I expected, but I think it's a pretty interesting way, and we should try that and see how it looks like. And go ahead with it.
So should we also continue the discussion in the mailing list?
Definitely.
And Carsten, do you want to suggest a proposal to start with, or we start with the mailing list and then?
So I think the next step would be to integrate 18, do the split, and then see whether we are happy with what we have. So that would lead to another draft IETF Cbor or something that you would have to acknowledge. So I think it's much better to do this in the concrete when we have looked at all 30-something tags and understand whether it's obvious what we want to do there. Great. Yeah, I think we got rid of the first to-do here on this list. I already said we have some editorial work on the preferred encoding to do. And we probably want to base the deterministic encoding on this, so it becomes really short. We said we have one minor update to the IANA considerations. By the way, if you look into the documents related to Cbor, you find one more tag application that is in the specification required place. So it really starts getting gobbled up. So it's probably time to actually do this. And yeah, what I wrote here probably is no longer true. So we will do the split, see whether we are happy, and then do one more round of reviews. And yeah, with some luck, we are ready for working class for that.
Can you give us an indicative timeline, or that you think estimated?
Well, we should have the split within April. So we still have the...
So in like 3 days?
Within April.
End of April then.
Yeah, it's not going to be April 1st. It's first need to get home and start the term, and it's more like April 10th. Good. There is one more piece of Cbor housekeeping that I think we should be doing. You might have noticed the Cbor sequence draft. So there is something called JSON sequence. You want to say something?
Yeah, I actually did have some more comments on Cbor BIS before.
Oh, yes. Please.
So I think this a minor, probably straightforward one is I found a few things with the section on syntax errors well formed.
Yeah, that's the one that mostly gets deleted by number 17.
Well, I was looking at the tip of the
Yes, and
GitHub.
I haven't integrated the rest of 17
Okay.
because I want to check the text that I know is not perfect.
Okay.
And Jeffrey is proposing to delete it. I just want to check whether all the things that are said there are actually already being said at another place. And then we can delete
All right.
it.
So I'm not sure what I'm looking at, and I guess then I'm a little confused about that. But
Yeah, this is in progress work, so
okay.
it work
I
that
thought I
hasn't
was
been done
was
yet.
doing the right thing, looking at the.
You are
looking
looking
at
at
the-
the right thing, but it's just
Yes,
not done.
at that. Okay. So that, most of that is I don't think any of that is difficult or controversial. The one thing that I really want to bring up is the sort of secure coding or secure implementation, security considerations in strict mode, and how we actually want to approach this. The way I would like to see it done is that everything to do with decoder's implementation in a defensive style should be in the security consideration section, section 9, and probably nothing else anywhere else in the document. It should all be there in section 9, and it should be pretty sharp. And to the point, that also all Cbor decoders are really expected to be very defensive, to stand on their own, not to expect any magic firewalls or anything else to help them. That every decoder or generic or protocol specific needs to stand on its own. So I would assume that's a generally agreed upon thing, and we should say that.
Yes.
Okay. So then, strict mode talks about kind of firewall functionality.
No longer.
No longer. So that's okay.
That was the part that we took out in the last round.
But it's not in the tip of GitHub yet.
It should be.
Okay, I don't think. I thought I still.
Maybe I messed this up, but it should be.
Okay.
But the point is that we just said we are going to cut down strict significantly
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah. Right. So. Okay.
And I think the amount of promises that should be in the security considerations section about this should be very small.
Yeah, probably zero. But
Probably zero.
Okay. All right. So that was the main thing. I wanted to make sure there's an understanding about how we're
Yes.
dealing with documenting what decoders expect, how defensive decoders are supposed to be. All right, okay. I think that's it for me, but I have to check my notes.
Yeah. So one nice thing that somebody who has an hour or two at their hand could do is look at the code in Appendix C and find out whether that's actually defensive enough. It's pseudocode, so it's a bit hard for me to test. So you have to translate it into the programming language of your choice.
Yeah, I wasn't too worried about that. That seems like that was reasonable. I do have one more thing I want to bring
Yes.
up, which is looking at the tip, section 4.7, and all of section 4 about the use of must. And sometimes must in section 4 is used to mean you're out of compliance with the whole protocol. And sometimes it's used to say you're in strict mode or not, or you're. So it seems like it's used two different ways in section 4. sometimes it's qualified and sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
And
So the problem with those musts is that the one must that you probably are talking about, I think there are two in section 4 that are left. The one actually is a must on the application, which is slightly weird. So we are placing an onus on the designer of a Cbor application protocol to only design it in a certain way. And we do that nowhere else. Of course, we have a lot of implicit musts just from the way Cbor is. But this particular must, which is about tag duplication, that's called out explicitly again in section 4.
right, so that's the qualified one.
Okay.
Is it right?
I don't know what you mean by qualified.
If you're doing preferred serialization, then you must do this.
Can you just bring up? It's probably taking a minute or so, but it would be useful. So from the GitHub, the editor's copy.
Right. So section 4.10, there's a bunch of musts that if you're doing deterministic encoding, then you must do this, must do this, and must do this. So those are conditional on whether you're doing deterministic encoding or not. So those I would call those as qualified musts or conditional musts, because you may not be doing deterministic encoding. But then there's another must, which is you must not. No protocol must rely on tag ordering.
Yes, that's the one
map ordering, and that should not be qualified at all. That's just an absolute for Cbor, right?
Yes.
So there's the example of the two kinds of musts.
Yes.
And it seems awkward and confusing to have those kinds of musts.
So maybe putting the deterministic encoding into the section that really is about creating Cbor-based protocols wasn't so smart.
Sorry, what was that again?
Well, right now, if you can scroll up so we can see the table of contents. Scroll the table of contents with 2 fingers. There's no one finger scrolling up the table of contents. You have to use 2 fingers. Uh-huh. Just move them. Don't squeeze. Move.
Now that's good.
It's configured the wrong way around.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, we're getting rid of this strict decoding mode or reducing it to a paragraph somewhere, and then we have this deterministically encoded Cbor section here, and that's really part of the creating Cbor-based protocols section. Now you want to structure this slightly differently.
This is Jeffrey Yaskin. The 4.10 gives a protocol a piece of terminology in order to define itself.
Yes.
And so, like, I think it's in a reasonable place.
Okay.
But if someone was confused when reading it, then that's a counterindication. And it would be fine with me to put it kind of in its own top level section, saying like something about terminology that protocols can use or that authors can use to define protocols. Because like the core deterministic encoding requirements are it's a term that you're supposed to use in another definition, and then it's just defined here using some musts.
So I could imagine pulling out 4.9 and 4.10 and
Yes.
putting them in their own section. Okay. Maybe even in front of the existing section 4. Good.
Would that help, Lawrence? Would that answer your?
I think so, yeah.
Yes.
So then that means all the musts in section 4 would be non-qualified or non-conditional. They're really absolute musts.
Yes.
And then there's some text at the beginning of intro in section 4 that could be deleted that says some of the things in here are must and some of them are not.
Yep.
Okay.
Or maybe not deleted, but changed.
Yeah.
Good. So I ran ahead with one other piece of Cbor housekeeping that I see coming up, which is the Cbor sequence. So JSON has a JSON sequence. Cbor, for all intents and purposes, also has it, because application protocols are already using it, but it doesn't have a media type and it doesn't have a content format number. And this document is mostly a registration document, but it also clarifies what the format really is and gives it a name, which is Cbor sequence. So if you compare the two documents, you will find that the Cbor sequence document is about a third of the size of the JSON sequence document, which comes from the fact that it's just much easier to concatenate Cbor than it is to concatenate ASCII. So we don't need record separators. Who in this room knew what a record separator is? Well, I think the two of us are old enough to know that. If you need to know more about record separators, you can read RFC 20, which, by the way, I recommend to everyone. You may not have known that that exists, but it's actually an internet standard. Yes, really. The other thing is that the JSON sequence actually tries to leverage the record separator to provide a level of error recovery. And I neither really know how to do this for Cbor sequences, nor do I think it's needed. We're using Cbor sequences in channels that already have some form of integrity protection. So yeah, if it breaks, it breaks. So there is no attempt at doing error recovery here. So I published that thing, and people already told me, yeah, right, that's exactly what I need. When can I put in a normative reference to this? So I would like to find a way to accelerate this. It's not currently in our charter. So plan A would be to find an AD sponsor, and plan B would be to look at the rechartering discussion we will have in 10 minutes and see whether that is fast enough. Who has, go ahead.
Alexei, where do you think in the whole priority of all the things done in the working group this sits?
This is modulated. It's a relatively small number of applications that need it. It's a relatively trivial amount of work. So that kind of balances.
Okay. Sean Leonard. I read the draft. I think it's fine, and I don't have a problem with the working group adopting it. If it goes anywhere, I think the working group should adopt it. That being said, I'm just curious what the use cases are, because it is sublimely simple. But I think that one of the reasons for JSON sequences was there were applications around logging, I think, where they need to stream,
yes,
these sorts of things. And I'm just curious, what is the industry or the demand for Cbor sequences? Thanks.
But the one document that was defined before the Cbor sequences, and where we kind of regret it, is CNML. CNML has a streaming mode that is defined in a pretty weird way. And with Cbor sequences, we could have done this right. And I could imagine that other documents are in this situation where it just would be good for them to have Cbor sequences as a little brick they can use in building their application. So I think John Matson had one example for using that. It's just a natural thing in when you have an environment where you have to send what we call a record of data in CDDL, and you already have a length available. It's really not necessary to bind this record with an array tag. This is pretty much what happens there. And the advantage is that when this stuff turns up in a streaming way, you have a complete Cbor data item. You are not really waiting for the array tag to close, and you don't have to guess at a value for the array tag if you want to stay definite. So that's the reason why Cbor sequences make sense. So who except Sean has read this? 1, 2.
Sean Leonard. So there is something I think you might want to think about this draft and about parsing it, right? Which is, as you pointed out in JSON sequences, they chose the record delimiter intentionally to be able to easily, right, without parsing the structure, go through and find, you know, where one structure ends and or one PDU ends and the other PDU begins. If you did this type of thing with X690, aka BER, DER, etc., for PDUs that have a known length, you can look at the first few bytes of the first PDU and then skip all the bytes. But you can't do that with Cbor because Cbor composite data types have the number of items. So have you thought about a delimiter?
No.
Or not?
Cbor does not use delimiters, period.
Right. Well, no, that's true. But neither does JSON. Right. That's why they chose an out-of-band character to pick the
JSON
delimiter.
is not using the entire character set.
Correct. That's right.
So they could just use the record separator. But the answer to your actual requirement already is in certain documents.
Mhm.
They put the elements of the Cbor sequence into byte strings. So they already
Right.
have a length tag on top of the thing. So you can get all your ASN1 beauty there, or your basic encoding rules beauty by packaging the Cbor data item in one Cbor byte string.
Got it. Right. Okay. I can think of a few ways to do it, but I guess I'd want to know what applications are using it for and whether being able to skip large quantities of Cbor items is desirable.
Yes. If you need something skippable in a Cbor document, that's the design pattern.
Right.
You put a byte string around it.
Okay. Got it. Where it's tagged as a Cbor encapsulated data item.
You
in
could
the
do
byte
that,
string?
but it's not needed if the whole thing is a Cbor sequence.
Right. Okay.
Should this document suggest or require that pattern?
It could suggest it. I think that's a good idea. Certainly not require. So there are lots of applications where it's fine to use the internal delimiting function of the data item. Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Okay.
But we'll continue talking about this and the place in this working group when we go to the charter discussion.
Okay, now I actually have managed to be behind schedule, but then I can do the next one quickly. Yeah, you know about this batteries included thing. I thought I had deleted this slide anyway. So there are a number of text drafts out there, and right now I want to talk about the array draft because that has just completed working group last call, and there were some pretty good editorial comments that again need to be put in. Just to remind everyone what that is, it's a table of 2 times 3 times 4 tags, and it allows you to have homogeneous arrays of certain data types as are fashionable in the graphics community and other communities that are handling large data items, but they are also useful for small data items like RGB values. So the issues that are in the tracker have a number of good editorial suggestions. These just need to be done. There also was requests to get more explanations about the use cases for homogeneous and clamped arrays. So why do we define a homogeneous tag? Why do we define a clamped tag? And yeah, so this has to be written up. The current text that explains that for the clamped tag is really easy to misunderstand. So it's not trying to tell people what the history of the data in that array is. I mean, that's also interesting, but really how they should handle it once it's unpacked again. So that's something that's very specific to the work this came from. In the JavaScript environment where these arrays are defined, there is a specific type for clamped arrays of 8-bit numbers, and this work is mirroring that. And finally, we had a discussion about deterministic encoding of typed arrays. And I think we have arrived at the conclusion that the decision, what precision to use, what range to use, what byte order to use is really an application decision here. So there is no deterministic encoding implication at the generic Cbor level. So if an application wants to define its own deterministic encoding rules, here it's free to do so.
So on the, this is Lawrence Lundblad, on the big Indian versus little Indian. So you could imagine then a generic encoder or decoder should have to support both big and little Indian, and it lets the caller decide what they want to put on the wire and what they want to accept. And that's a little weird because you wind up doing a lot of having some extra code in there for that.
Yes.
That the point of supporting choosing one is to avoid that code.
Yes. So yes, this is out of character with the rest of Cbor, and the nice thing is that Cbor is actually stable enough that it can survive that. I mean, we can sometimes do something like that, willfully ignoring our own principles, just because the work we are trying to interface with has different principles. And the typed arrays just come in these two forms, and it would be unnecessary work for these people to require one of them.
And Lawrence Lundblad again. Let me ask again, why not just choose like little Indian and say that's it?
Well, the application could do that.
But why not choose one representation for array tags and just say that's it, so there's not an ambiguity?
Well, because the work that we are referencing allows both. And if you build something that is informed by two tracks of standards colliding with each other, how do you handle that? You can try to impose the will of one group over the other group, or you can try to find something that doesn't break either of them. And this is trying to not break the world of typed arrays as defined by Kronos and JavaScript. So definitely I didn't like that, but Jonathan, the co-author on this, really convinced me that this is what we want to do. And unfortunately, he has vanished from the face of the internet. So I don't know where he is, but it was really useful input from him. Good. That was my last slide. I think.
Almost on time. So before we talk about next steps, just one thing I wanted to say I forgot in introduction was that we're going to schedule interim meetings. We're going to continue with the calls, so every 2 weeks, and we're going to do a new doodle poll and coordinate with ACE and Core so that we get the same time, and COSI, so that we get the time that is good for everybody, and then we would have 1 week Core and 1 week Cbor, and then ACE and COSI in the middle there sometimes.
Yeah, in the interim between 103 and 104, we had regular Core and Cbor meetings, and they both were on Wednesday, but they were at different times of the day.
Yeah.
And that confused people.
So please make sure that you enter your preference so that we can select a time that is best for everybody.
On the coordination side, my IoT directorate hat on. Can we also coordinate with other groups like OMA, 1DM, and others? I mean, not like to the level we do within IETF, but
Yeah,
try to
we
make
can
fun
probably
times
try
that
to
we
avoid the slots where we know that other groups are.
Yeah, and also
Our
other groups
meeting.
are willing to also adjust theirs as long as they get enough heads up
Okay.
on the
Yeah.
plans. So last time Wednesday was horrible. 3
It's-
conflicts at the same time.
It's probably still gonna be Wednesday, but we can fix the time slot.
But yeah, but let's work on that
Yeah,
to make
let's do that
coordination.
offline.
And I mean, Carsten and I already kind of started a bit of activity on that, collecting on one wiki page in IoT Directorate. When are the each groups meeting? I think it's already outdated, but let's do an exercise on that because
Okay.
I've been telling all the other groups this is going to change after this IETF meeting, so it wasn't much point doing it earlier.
Yeah.
But now let's do it together.
Good. Yes.
Hi, Jaime Jimenez. I'm wondering if now is the right place to ask whether we can use Jitsi instead of WebEx for these type of meetings for simplicity.
Okay. The idea is that with WebEx we can record the meetings. That's the official way of doing and scheduling, but we'll look into it. And now for next steps. So we have listed here some documents that are now in back burner, and we should be considering for rechartering discussion. I just noticed there is a new one. I mean, 2 new ones. So there is this tag for coordinate reference system that was submitted 3 days ago, and then Jim's CMS content types for Cbor as well.
That's one. The last one is interesting because really it's not something we do to interface with CMS. It's something that CMS does to interface with Cbor.
I basically put that in because I wanted the people in Cbor to know about it, but I wasn't planning to run it through this group. It was basically, I wanted people to have a chance to look at it and say, yes, this is the right set of things that we should be encoding.
Yeah. So now you're aware that that exists. So we have talked about the sequence tag, and Carsten has mentioned CDDL 2.0, and also we have the one document that is charter but not yet adopted, which is the OID. We're waiting for an update on that to do the call for adoption, and this OIDs plus is anything that might get taken out of that, so that's also something that is up for discussion. So I'm asking for people's opinion here. What do you think is prioritized? What should we do?
I think we need to sort this into different buckets. So CDL 2.0 really is about evolution of one of our core specs. So this is not maintenance, this is not housekeeping, this is evolution. New stuff, new features, trying to react to user requirements that we begin to understand more fully. So that's one bucket. And the only place where I really see this right now is CDDL. I don't think we have anything we have to evolve in this way. With the potential exception of the time tag, where probably you could do a couple more time working groups, but we're not going to do that. Then we have housekeeping stuff like the sequence thing. And we have tag definitions of different qualities. Some of those tag definitions are really not much more than also housekeeping stuff. Some are really motivated by applications within the IETF. So for instance, the template tag that's not on this list is really something that came out of LPWAN, and that we may want to revisit. They have been busy doing their protocol, but now they are thinking about the data models that actually control the thing, and that's where the template tag comes in again. So we have one bucket of tags that really come from inside the IETF. Then we have another bucket of tags, like the time tag, which just kind of are obvious and need to be done. So they're very similar to the tags that we already have, that they're good parts of the ecosystem. And maybe with a decision to split out the most of the tags, that's a good time to think about restructuring this area. And then we have a third area of tags, which really are registration requests from outside, like the error tag or the geographic coordinate thing, which are mainly the domain of the designated experts to talk with the applicants. But in the end, of course, if a tag comes out that has some wider applicability, it would be good to document this in an RFC. So I think we should develop a standard procedure of doing that, whether as a working document or an independent document, I don't know. But I think it makes sense to think about this bucket of documents, because those will be coming flowing in at probably increasing speed.
Alexei, do you have an opinion as AD?
Not yet. I'm trying to come up with one.
Okay, good.
I was just about to check what's in the current charter too.
So it's Cbor BIS, CDDL, and array tag and OID tag. And then recharter for adding more items or.
Well, my general advice would be try to prioritize them and try not to take too many.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's fine to have a charter generic charter working on extensions, but you know, try to limit your number of your milestones you have for this. How many documents you have actively being worked on and stuff like that.
One comment, the sequence stuff is actually quite interesting because based on the discussion, thinking RG and beyond, we're seeing more and more of these streaming kind of use cases, which we haven't been seeing before. And having good tools in the toolbox for handling those cases is pretty useful. And then another comment on the error tag reminded me, do we have how much capabilities of signaling errors within Cbor and also outside? And I'm thinking of, if I use co-op to exchange my Cbors, there's something wrong within the Cbor document. And what are the error codes to use in what kind of cases? Now we have like a bad request, but is there something more, should we come up with some more detailed ways telling that, okay, this is the kind of what went wrong in the request? And is there something in the interplay between the Cbor things and data models in general and on the protocols that are carrying them?
When we defined CoAP, we thought about this problem for a while and came up with errors that are supposed to be handled by the application and essentially change the application state machine. These need to be defined, and that's where we have things like 404 and so on. And there are other errors that are really hard to handle for the application because something went wrong. And that something that went wrong is often only be describable in ways that are specific to the application in which it went wrong. So that's why we invented the diagnostic payload. There's something similar now in the HTTP space, which is not exactly called error document. I think it's called problem document or something like that. Maybe it's worth looking at this space and seeing whether there's anything we should be doing on the Cbor side. But we already have this concept of diagnostic payload and the concept of problem document, so we could start out from that. So you're going to write the draft?
I can have a look if someone writes it.
I'd have to see some very big tight problem statements before I would think that would be in scope.
Yeah, so not just yet suggesting to add that in the charter just yet, but just like, yeah, something for us to perhaps explore later on. And yeah, some of the exploration, of course, can be done in RG, where we are looking into these aspects, but let's do it together.
So what I hear is these two working areas, let's say extension 4.
We have the evolution of our core documents,
Okay.
which is only the CDDL,
The CDDL,
2.0
yeah.
thing. We have the housekeeping stuff.
That was
Me-
the second for me. That's what I call it. Yeah, but go ahead, sorry.
And we have the 3 buckets of tags, the ones that we want, the ones that the IETF wants, and the ones that other people want.
So we should, and what Alexis said, we should prioritize on those to make sure we don't take on.
I don't have an opinion on which one you want to work on. I think that's if you want to do a poll on them, do a poll on them. I don't really care. Just pick the one you really think are the most important one and prioritize them.
Yeah, except that the importance goes across these 5 categories.
Mm-hmm.
So for the tag documents that the IETF wants, we could decide to systematically push them out to the using side and just say, keep us in the loop. That would be one way to handle it. Just trusting that knowledge about Cbor is sufficiently widely spread in the IETF that we can do that. The ones that we want as a way of evolving the Cbor ecosystem, I think we still have to do. They usually don't come with extremely tight timelines because they come up as we learn, and we learn slowly, and at some point things are kind of ripe for saying, okay, now we can write this up and ship it. So it's little urgency, and usually also not that much work, because by the time it actually hits the working group, probably the problem is well understood. So that's why I think these can be done with a relatively high priority, because they're little work. And then these external requests, those are all over the map. So many of these can actually be handled by first registering them and then going ahead and then fixing up the specification, which is a little bit unclean, but it works for people who have ship dates. So again, it may not be a high urgency thing to actually get these documents published, but of course it's nice to the people who suggest these things and work on honing them to actually have a publication process they can use.
So again, being a bit ignorant and actually not knowing what documents are, registrations are in the other IETF working group category, would the working group like to triage them and check, are they competent enough to be, delegated to other working groups, or are they better be done here? And also coordinate the timeline, with the other working groups, when they need to be done. So that might be just one input to your decision process.
Okay, I think that was good discussion to start with. Sure. So since we still have 3 documents that are supposed to be published in the current charter, I think it's good to start now with discussing the charter, but I don't think we will have anything very soon anyway.
Well, of the 2 main documents, one is shipped and the other one is in the process of baking. So this kind of opens up the opportunity to define new slots from my point of view. And I wouldn't want the tags documents that are currently in the charter to be a gating factor for doing the rechartering. We can do the rechartering based on whatever model we want to come up with for handling tag documents. And whatever we haven't done at the time we do the rechartering just goes into that model and we are fine. I don't have a strong position on whether we should have shipped Cbor bis to the ISG when we start rechartering. That's Alexei's decision, but I think we should be ready by the time with a charter that is acceptable.
I think asking for rechartering once you ship the base spec revision to ISG would really help from perception thing. I think this working group was a bit slow starting, but it seems like it's picking up pace. So certainly finishing CDDL helps, but demonstrating that you can, nearly done with one or more other things would certainly be more encouraging for the rest of ISG, I would say. Well, yeah.
I mean, my expectation was that the chairs would sit down over the next month and put together a candidate charter and then have discussion as a working group in May. And then we can, as soon as we get to an agreement, then we can push it up to the ISG. And they can sit on it or not as they feel like.
That's fine. Once you have charter, we can discuss where you are with the rest of stuff. So, yeah, okay.
We're out of time, so thank you for today. Yeah, 2 minutes over. You wanted to go to wait now. Thank you, minute takers.
Anyone didn't sign the blue sheets, please come forward. Karsten.
Did he not? Ah.